I never imagined paradise could be stolen from me while I was sipping coffee on my own dock, watching the sunrise paint the lake in gold and crimson. My private island, a slice of heaven inherited from my grandfather, had always been my sanctuary, untouched, serene, and mine. But that morning, the sound of bulldozers, hammers, and chainsaws shattered the quiet like a punch to the gut. My eyes widened as I saw them. 23 gleaming lake cabins rising where wildflowers once danced, each one stamped with the HOA's logo, as if they had the audacity to claim my land before I even blinked. How did this happen? I whispered, disbelief catching in my throat. They said I had no say, that the deeds were technically theirs, that my grandfather's papers were missing in some bureaucratic maze. But every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. I had always been the quiet type, the one who solved problems with patience, not confrontation. But this felt personal. My island wasn't just land. It was memories of summers with my brother, evenings with my father telling stories by the fire, and nights staring at sky so full of stars it made the world outside feel meaningless. And now strangers were living those moments, turning my sanctuary into a vacation rental hotspot while I was forced to watch from my boat like an outsider. Anger boiled beneath my chest, but so did a flicker of strategy. I wasn't going to fight with threats or social media rants. I had something more powerful than the HOA ever imagined. The truth hidden in dusty, old legal papers. But first I had to endure. I had to let them finish. Every day I sailed closer, pretending the cabins were just part of the view, while secretly photographing every corner, every beam, every corner stake. I memorized their layout, their flaws, the little construction mistakes they made thinking I wasn't watching. Every nail they hammered into my land only fueled my determination. And then came the night when I realized that. Patience was my secret weapon. If I pulled out the deed too early, they could scream fraud or technicalities. But if I waited, recorded everything meticulously, I could strike back in a way that would leave them speechless. I remember standing on my pier that night, wind whipping through my hair, and asking the universe, from which part of the world are you watching this story unfold? If you're feeling the same shock I felt, smash that like button, subscribe for what happens next, because the storm is just beginning, and you won't believe how I turned betrayal into my ultimate victory. The moon reflected in the lake like a silver eye, silently judging the audacity of people who thought my paradise was theirs. Little did they know, the real battle wasn't about cabins. It was about legacy, and I had every intention of reclaiming mine. That be why the time the last cabin roof was nailed into place, the island felt alien. 23 pristine structures sat like trophies on land that had once belonged entirely to me. I could still remember running barefoot across the grass as a child, feeling the dirt between my toes and hearing the water lap gently against the shore. That intimacy had been stolen, replaced by polished wood and shiny metal railings. Yet I forced myself to breathe. Letting them finish was part of the plan. If I acted too soon, I risked losing the upper hand in a legal battle that was already stacked against me in perception, if not in fact. I spent my days sailing around the island, notebook in hand, documenting every detail. I measured distances, mapped pathways, and noted every overstep they had committed. They had built too close to the waterline in certain areas, ignored zoning restrictions in others, and cut down trees that were explicitly protected under old environmental agreements. I photographed everything, my lens capturing their carelessness and arrogance in equal measure. They didn't even realize I was keeping a meticulous record. To them, I was just a distant observer, a harmless island owner who tolerated their presence out of good faith. Little did they know, every snap of my camera was a brick in the fortress of evidence I was building. But the emotional toll was relentless. Each morning, I awoke to the sound of power tools and shouted orders. Each night, I went to bed haunted by the memory of laughter that was no longer mine. The cabins were rented out, and visitors wandered where I once wandered freely, leaving footprints on trails I had blazed myself. I could see families setting up picnic tables on my old fire pit sites, couples taking selfies under the trees I had climbed, and children skipping stones on the same pier where I had learned to swim. Anger surged through me. But beneath was grief, the grief of losing a place that was stitched into the very fabric of who I was. Yet in the midst of frustration, I found clarity. My grandfather had been meticulous with his papers, leaving no loose ends. Somewhere in a dusty safe in the city, hidden among decades of forgotten documents, was the deed that proved the island had never legally left my family's hands. If the HOA thought they could claim ownership because of missing files or bureaucratic oversights, they were in for a shock. I was determined to uncover that deed, and I wasn't going to let a pile of cabins intimidate me. As I watched the workers leave one evening, the sun setting the lake ablaze in fiery orange and deep purple, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. The island looked perfect on the surface, but I knew the cracks beneath were where the real power lay. Every miscalculation they made in construction, every corner they cut, every regulation they ignored was ammunition for the battle that was about to come. I wasn't just reclaiming land. I was reclaiming respect for the legacy my grandfather had built, for the memories that no builder could erase. Days turned into weeks, and I kept my distance, pretending to ignore the activity while my plan crystallized. I hired a lawyer who specialized in property law, a woman who looked unassuming but was known for dismantling HOA overreach with surgical precision. Together, we went through records, old maps, and legal precedents, piecing together a timeline that proved ownership had never transferred. Every cabin, every path, every landscape corner they thought they could claim became part of the case. I realized that this wasn't just about the island anymore. It was about principle. The HOA's audacity to build without consent, to occupy and profit from land that was never theirs, had awakened something in me I didn't know existed. A fierce, unyielding determination to protect what was mine, no matter the cost. There were nights when I sat alone on the pier, staring at the reflection of the cabins in the water. The silence around me felt heavy, almost accusatory. I thought of my grandfather and the stories he used to tell about family, honor, and legacy. I remembered him saying, "Land is more than soil and trees. It's history. Protect it like you protect the people you love." Those words were a lifeline. I realized this wasn't just a battle over property. It was a battle over identity, memory, and respect. Every cabin that gleamed in the sunset was a reminder of what I had to fight for, and I refused to let them win without a challenge. The workers had left for the weekend, leaving the island eerily quiet. For the first time in weeks, I walked among the cabins, feeling the cool wooden floors under my feet, listening to the creaks and groans of structures that were technically mine, but legally the HOA wanted to claim. I noticed mistakes they hadn't corrected, nails sticking out dangerously, uneven steps, a foundation that had shifted slightly because of poor planning. These imperfections weren't just safety hazards. They were evidence. Evidence that the cabins were rushed, that the HOA had acted without due diligence, and that my patience had been worth every agonizing moment of watching them take over my land. By the time I left the island that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. The stage was set, the evidence was gathered, and the deed was within reach. The battle wouldn't be easy, and the HOA would fight fiercely to maintain control, but I knew one undeniable truth. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the love I had for this island, the memories woven into its soil, and the lengths I would go to protect it. For the first time since the cabins appeared, I allowed myself to smile, knowing that the next chapter of this fight wouldn't be dictated by their arrogance. It would be dictated by justice, patience, and a family legacy that refused to be stolen. And as I sailed back to the mainland, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine and lake water, I felt ready. The calm before the storm had arrived, and when the storm hit, the HOA would never see it coming. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and tension, the kind of tension that makes your chest tighten and your hands tremble, even when you know you're right. I walked in that morning with the deed carefully tucked into my briefcase, my lawyer at my side, and the weight of my grandfather's legacy pressing down on me. Across from me, the HOA's lawyers smiled with that smug, practiced confidence of people used to getting what they wanted. They thought this would be an easy victory, a case of we built, therefore we own, but they hadn't counted on meticulous planning, photographic evidence, and illegal proof hidden in decades-old documents, as the judge called the case. I felt my pulse quicken. This was more than a legal battle. It was personal. Every cabin that stood on my island represented months of tension. They were evidence. Evidence that the cabins were rushed, that the HOA had acted without due diligence, and that my patience had been worth every agonizing moment of watching them take over my land. By the time I left the island that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. The stage was set, the evidence was gathered, and the deed was within reach. The battle wouldn't be easy, and the HOA would fight fiercely to maintain control, but I knew one undeniable truth. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the love I had for this island, the memories woven into its soil, and the lengths I would go to protect it. For the first time since the cabins appeared, I allowed myself to smile, knowing that the next chapter of this fight wouldn't be dictated by their arrogance. It would be dictated by justice, patience, and a family legacy that refused to be stolen. And as I sailed back to the mainland, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine and lake water, I felt ready. The calm before the storm had arrived, and when the storm hit, the HOA would never see it coming. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and tension, the kind of tension that makes your chest tighten and your hands tremble, even when you know you're right. I walked in that morning with the deed carefully tucked into my briefcase, my lawyer at my side, and the weight of my grandfather's legacy pressing down on me. Across from me, the HOA's lawyers smiled with that smug, practiced confidence of people used to getting what they wanted. They thought this would be an easy victory, a case of we built, therefore we own, but they hadn't counted on meticulous planning, photographic evidence, and illegal proof hidden in decades-old documents, as the judge called the case. I felt my pulse quicken. This was more than a legal battle. It was personal. Every cabin that stood on my island represented months of tension. But the HOA wasn't done. They argued that they had invested millions in the cabins, that people had booked stays, and that evicting them would cause irreparable harm. I listened quietly, letting my lawyer counter each argument methodically, presenting the fact that investment does not trump ownership, and that the financial decisions they made did not legitimize the theft of property. It was exhausting watching them twist reality to suit their greed, but I felt a strange sense of power knowing that the law and my preparation was firmly on my side. As the hours passed, emotions began to peak. I saw families who had rented the cabins arrive in court, looking confused and worried. Some whispered apologies, unaware that they were part of a larger scheme. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I reminded myself that this fight was not against them. It was against the people who had stolen my inheritance. The judge asked pointed questions about construction permits, environmental violations, and the ownership chain. Each time, my lawyer answered with precision, citing maps, records, and the long-forgotten documents that finally saw the light of day. Midway through the hearing, a moment struck me in a way I didn't expect. Standing there, watching the cabins on my island being discussed, as if they were just structures and not memories, I realized how much this place had shaped me. It wasn't just land. It was every summer with my brother, every evening by the fire, every quiet moment of reflection on the pier. And now, strangers had unknowingly lived inside those memories. My throat tightened, my vision blurred slightly, but I pushed forward. If I cried now, it could be seen as weakness. Instead, I let my determination shine. Every word I spoke infused with years of love, pain, and the desire to reclaim what was mine. By late afternoon, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. The HOA lawyers grew defensive, their confident smiles replaced by tension. Witnesses were called, construction inspectors who confirmed zoning violations, neighbors who had seen the lack of proper permits, and even former HOA board members who quietly admitted that the process had been rushed and unauthorized. One by one, my arsenal of evidence dismantled their arguments, leaving them grasping at fragments of logic and pleading for leniency that the law could not afford. I realized that patience, strategy, and persistence had brought me here. The fight was no longer just mine. It was a testament to standing up against those who think they can override truth with money and arrogance. The final moments of the session were surreal. The judge leaned back, scrutinizing every document, every photograph, every testimony. I could feel my pulse in my ears, each second stretching into eternity. Then came the declaration I had been waiting for. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. All constructions on the property must be vacated, and ownership is confirmed to the rightful heir. Relief crashed over me like waves against the shoreline. I had won. Every cabin, every overstep, every moment of anguish had led to this instant. I felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion, as though the weight of months had lifted from my shoulders. Walking out of the courthouse, the world felt brighter, sharper, and infinitely more mine. The HOA representatives scurried behind their lawyers, avoiding eye contact, while I allowed myself a quiet smile. I hadn't just reclaimed land. I had reclaimed respect, legacy, and the memories that no one could take away. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I felt an undeniable connection to the island, as though it was welcoming me home after months of turmoil. That night, alone on the pier, the lake reflecting the glow of the moon, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The cabins would be removed, the land restored, and my sanctuary would be mine once more. But more than that, I realized I had learned something deeper: the strength of patience, the power of preparation, and the unyielding force of protecting what is yours. This victory wasn't just about land. It was about courage, love, and a refusal to bow to greed. The first light of dawn painted my island in hues of gold and rose, casting long shadows across the cabins that had once represented invasion, but now symbolized a temporary victory for greed. I stood on the pier, the water lapping softly against the posts, listening to the distant sounds of trucks and machinery arriving, not for construction, but for removal. Every cabin that had risen on my land without consent was about to be dismantled piece by piece. And for the first time in months, I felt the island breathe again. This was my home, my sanctuary, and finally, it would feel like it belonged to me once more. Watching the workers at a distance, I felt a swirl of emotions. Anger had faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction and the bittersweet reflection of the past few months. Every photograph I had taken, every measurement, every meticulous record had led to this moment. The HOA had tried to manipulate reality with money, influence, and arrogance, but truth had prevailed. And yet, as I watched, I realized the true victory wasn't just legal, it was emotional. I had reclaimed the essence of this island. The laughter of my childhood, the quiet evenings under stars, the memories that no construction could ever erase. The first cabin was taken apart slowly, boards coming loose under the careful hands of the movers. I walked along the shore, feeling the sand between my toes, remembering how I had run here as a child, barefoot, chasing the echoes of my own laughter. It felt surreal to see the cabins, once so imposing, reduced to stacks of wooden nails. Each piece removed was a reminder that what had been taken from me could be restored. I realized how much I had underestimated the emotional weight of this fight. The court victory had been essential, yes, but seeing tangible results, witnessing the reclamation of space, was a healing process unlike any other. Neighbors, who had watched the HOA's audacity unfold, came by to offer congratulations and quiet words of support. "You stood your ground when no one else could," one said, shaking my hand firmly. "Most people would have given up." I smiled, a little embarrassed, because I hadn't fought for recognition. I had fought because it was right. And yet, the acknowledgement reminded me that standing up for yourself has ripples far beyond personal gain. It inspires, it teaches, and it validates the sacrifices made along the way. By the third day, more than half the cabins were dismantled. I walked among the debris, careful not to step on loose nails, and allowed myself to imagine the island as it had been before. Wildflowers swaying, trees standing tall, the pier untouched. Memories flooded back, bittersweet and vivid. The first time I swam to the tiny island cove with my brother, The countless nights spent lying under the stars with my father telling stories, the summers when the air smelled of pine and water and freedom. Each memory was a treasure, and now it felt as though I was retrieving not just land, but fragments of myself that had been buried under wood and nails. I remembered the people who had stayed in the cabins, completely unaware of the legal and emotional storm they had stepped into. Some waved shyly as they left, apologetic and confused. I felt no resentment toward them. They had been part of the HOA's scheme, yes, but they were also victims of circumstance. My fight had never been against ordinary people. It had been against the audacity of those who thought ownership could be claimed through disregard and exploitation. And in a strange way, the dismantling of the cabins allowed them to be part of the island's healing. 2. Witnessing a restoration that went far beyond legal documents. As the last cabin was removed, I stood on the pier and looked out across the lake. The island was still, peaceful, and familiar once more. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and water, mingled with the faint tang of sawdust from the dismantling. I ran my hand along the railing, feeling the cool wood beneath my fingertips, and allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time in months. This was home again, not just in ownership, but in spirit. The island had been tested, invaded, and challenged, yet it had endured. And so had I. That evening, I lit a small fire by the shore, the crackling flames echoing against the calm water. Sitting there, I reflected on what this battle had taught me. Patience is a weapon, preparation is power, and love, for place, for memory, for legacy, is unbreakable. I thought of my grandfather, imagining him beside me, proud that I had defended what he had entrusted to us. The court had ruled in my favor, yes, but the deeper victory was personal. I had confronted arrogance, greed, and disruption. It emerged not only as the rightful owner of the land, but as the guardian of its history and soul. As night fell, stars mirrored perfectly in the lake's surface, I realized that this island was more than land. It was a living chronicle of my family, a testament to resilience, and a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how insurmountable they seem. I could have turned away when the cabins were built, chosen convenience over conflict, and accepted a loss that wasn't mine to concede. But I hadn't. I had faced fear, frustration, and uncertainty, and had emerged victorious. The island would once again be a place of solitude, of peace, and of memories being created, but this time with a deeper understanding of its value, not just in property, but in spirit. I walked along the shoreline, letting the water wash over my feet, thinking of the summers ahead, of sunsets on the pier, of quiet nights spent listening to the rustle of the trees. The cabins were gone, but the lessons remained. Courage, patience, and unwavering dedication could reclaim even what seemed lost. And as I looked across the lake, I felt a smile spread across my face. My paradise was mine again, restored not only in land, but in heart, soul, and legacy. The storm had passed, the battle was won, and the island, my sanctuary, stood serene once more. I sat by the fire that night, the gentle waves reflecting stars in a mirror of hope, knowing that no one could ever take away what was truly mine, the memories, the love, and the spirit of a place that had endured just as I had.